He rescued hostages and was a hero known only as Shadow. But after retirement, he was forgotten, his pension revoked, his name erased from the records. He starved, slept under a bridge, and one day, stole an expired sandwich. The system pushed a legend into a courtroom. But when the judge learned who he really was, the room fell silent. What verdict did the judge deliver? The jungle didn't breathe, it listened. Staff Sergeant Henry Shadow Voss crouched low beneath a canopy of dripping leaves, eyes fixed through thermal goggles on a corrugated metal warehouse 30 meters ahead. No sound but the drip of moisture and the slow, steady breaths of the five-man team behind him. Inside, intelligence said, a hostage waited, an American diplomat's son, barely 14. A single tripwire blinked bright white in his goggles, stretching across the only visible entry. Too easy. Too exposed. And definitely not in the intel packet. Henry whispered a code into the mic. Blind Tiger. Trip at 9 o'clock. Command replied, abort. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he moved, a blur through the underbrush, disarming the trap with the precision of a surgeon. Minutes later, the boy was in his arms, silent, alive. The team vanished back into the green. Mission success. No casualties. Another ghost story added to the black book. They called him Shadow because he never left a footprint. His record was spotless. Dozens of operations with names classified above top secret. He didn't ask for recognition, he avoided it. Recognition meant exposure. Exposure meant vulnerability. When retirement came, it arrived with a ceremony under a blistering sun. Fort Bragg's brass showed up in full. They read citations, shook his hand, pinned fresh medals to his chest like they still mattered. Beside him stood his oldest friend, Major Mike Donnelly, leaning on a cane, cancer eating through his spine. They'd served together for over 2 decades. Afghanistan, Syria, 2 places no one would ever put on the record. You're the quiet one, Mike had once said, slapping him on the back after a mission in Baghdad, but you carry the rest of us. The words echoed that day, as Henry accepted a folded flag and stared into the horizon. He'd always thought leaving the military would feel like stepping into the light. Instead, it felt like turning off a radio that had always kept him company. He moved into a studio apartment outside Asheville, modest, with thin walls and a single window that overlooked a brick wall. He applied for VA benefits like they told him to. Medical coverage. PTSD support. Pension continuation. All by the book. He filled out the forms, attached documents, provided copies of orders that technically didn't exist. Months passed. Then came a letter in a clean white envelope. Claim denied, insufficient record of Operation 19E-71-G. Henry stared at the code. He'd led that operation. Recovered 6 wounded men and retrieved an intelligence package that had altered diplomatic strategy in Central Asia. But it didn't exist on paper, and that made him no one. He tried again. A second denial came. Then the pension check stopped arriving altogether, review pending. Mike's voice still reached him over the phone, raspier with each call. You hanging in there? He'd ask. Always, Henry would answer. Until one January morning, a nurse called instead. Mike had passed away in his sleep. No pain. No visitors. Henry went to the funeral in borrowed shoes and an old black jacket. There was no flag team, no firing squad. Just a pine coffin, a cold sky, and silence. He stood there until everyone else had left. He didn't cry. He never did. A month later, the landlord raised the rent. Henry tried selling a medal, his Bronze Star, for a few $100. It was enough to stall eviction for 30 days. But no one wanted to hire a quiet, gray-haired man with gaps in his resume and shadows in his eyes. The security company said he was overqualified. The grocery said, too stiff. When the landlord changed the locks, Henry didn't argue. He just walked away. He kept the dog tags. Always the dog tags. When he found a spot beneath a stone bridge by the river, he tied them to a loop in his coat where a button used to be. Some battles end with medals, he muttered one bitter night as the wind sliced through the sleeves of his jacket. Others end with silence. And in that silence, Henry Voss, once a legend, lay down and disappeared. Henry Voss didn't vanish. He faded. It didn't happen all at once. There was no collapse, no cinematic fall from grace. It was slow erosion, like paint peeling from a wall that no one noticed had once been white. The first week without shelter, he spent nights in a bus terminal. The fluorescent lights stayed on all night, buzzing like insects. At 4 a.m., security guards politely told him to move on. By the second week, he found a bench by the Riverwalk under an old brick bridge, dry when the rain didn't get sideways, quiet when the drunks weren't nearby. A place where a man could disappear in peace. He woke stiff every morning. His right shoulder, shattered years ago in Mosul, now throbbed with each breath of cold air. He washed in gas station bathrooms and used the crumpled paper towels to dry his face. The reflection in the mirror grew more unfamiliar by the day, gray creeping into his beard, lines folding deeper under his eyes that no longer scanned for danger, just for warmth. He still held on to rules. Wake before sunrise. Fold the blanket. Never complain. Never beg. The routine became armor. People passed by him like he was fog. Once, a woman tossed a handful of coins into his cup while talking on her phone. She never broke stride. Once, a teenager offered him half a sandwich, then sprinted off like he'd broken some rule of the city. Henry nodded, still chewing long after the boy had vanished. Another time, a man in a sharp suit dropped a business card into his lap without a word. When Henry looked down, it read, "Repent. Jesus saves." He didn't throw it away. Just tucked it into the pocket with the crumpled VA rejection letter. He wasn't angry. Not anymore. Anger was a resource, and like food and heat, it was best rationed. One day, he found a job cleaning gutters on a 3-story building. The foreman gave him $20 cash and a banana. The next day, he came back, but the job had moved on. No forwarding address. He checked the dumpsters behind bakeries before dawn. The trick was to get there before the truck but after the staff had left. Muffins, sometimes. Day-old bread. A half-eaten croissant once, still warm. He wiped the crumbs from his beard and walked slowly to nowhere. One night, as the rain came in sheets, he tucked his coat under the bridge and tried to sleep. His ribs ached. A dull, grinding pain settled in his side, like something inside was rusting. He pressed his fingers to the ache and whispered, "Not tonight." The dog tags, looped around his wrist, clinked faintly as he shifted. That sound, metal against bone, was the only reminder he hadn't always been this. That somewhere, there was a version of him who had mattered. He once led teams through black sites and battlefields. Now he counted bottle returns like operations, 6 for $1. 30 made a meal. One evening, he passed a storefront with a muted television in the window. A military funeral played behind the glass. A coffin. Folded flags. Rifle salute. The scrolling headline read, "Decorated veteran dies alone in motel room." Henry watched until the video looped again. Then he turned and walked away. He hadn't spoken in nearly a week. Not because he couldn't, but because there was no one left to speak to. Even birds didn't land near him anymore. Only once, a woman with silver hair sat beside him on the bench by the bus station. She didn't look at him. Just offered a thermos. "Soup," she said. He took it. Nodded. Said, "Thank you." She left before he could ask her name. He drank slowly, letting the warmth spread through his chest. It wasn't the soup that made his eyes sting. It was the fact that it came without pity. Somewhere in a pocket, beneath threadbare lining and lint, he still carried a photo of his old unit. Folded 12 times. Mike's smile in the corner, half faded now. Every few nights, Henry took it out, looked at it under the streetlight, and whispered, "Still here. Still here." The hunger wasn't sharp. It was slow and sinking, like gravity. Henry hadn't eaten in nearly 2 days, not properly. He'd found a bruised banana behind a produce truck and a stale granola bar dropped near the park bench. But cold had stolen his appetite, and now it returned with aching vengeance. His fingers were numb. His side throbbed with the same grinding pain. The cold cut deeper tonight. The bridge had flooded, forcing him into the open. Across the street, a corner store's lights buzzed yellow against the blue dusk. Henry stood watching from across the road, rain dripping from his hood, shoulders hunched beneath a threadbare coat. A delivery truck pulled away from the back entrance. The rear door had been left cracked. A puff of heat drifted into the air. He didn't think. He just moved. Inside, the smell hit him first: processed bread, burnt cheese, artificial bacon. The trash bin by the rear stockroom was full. He scanned it. A row of plastic-wrapped sandwiches lay on top, marked with a bright red sticker, expired. He checked the door. No one. He reached in, pulled out the top one, egg and sausage, and tucked it into his coat. He turned to leave, silent as a shadow. That's when he heard the voice. "Hey! What the hell are you doing?" A young man in a red vest appeared at the end of the aisle, holding a mop. Henry froze. "I said put it down. You can't just steal." The sandwich still in his hand, Henry lifted it slowly. It was in the trash. "Doesn't matter," the clerk barked, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling the cops." Henry didn't run. He stood still, the sandwich dangling in his fingers. When the police arrived minutes later, he was seated on the curb, the food untouched beside him. At the precinct, they took his coat, fingerprinted him, asked him his name. "Voss," he said. "Henry. Staff Sergeant. Retired." The officer at the computer didn't blink. "Theft. Private property. It was expired. Still theft." Henry said nothing else. In the holding cell, he sat alone. The light overhead buzzed faintly, flickering now and then like it couldn't decide whether to stay on. The bench beneath him was cold steel. He rubbed his hands together. The ache in his gut dulled. Replaced by something heavier, shame. But he didn't weep. Didn't beg. Just waited. Hours passed. A new officer came by, older, slower. He looked over the clipboard, then glanced through the bars. "You served?" he asked. Henry nodded. The officer looked down. "Dog tags in your coat pocket." Henry had tied them to a belt loop. Always within reach. "You don't look like a thief," the officer muttered. "I wasn't stealing," Henry said quietly. "I was surviving." The officer didn't reply. Just looked at him another moment before walking away. But something shifted in the air after that, something invisible but real, like a breeze before a storm. Henry leaned back against the wall. Cold metal beneath him. Dog tags still warm from his skin. And for the first time in a long time, someone had asked, not assumed. The courtroom smelled like old wood and cold air. Henry sat at the defense table, his coat returned to him but unzipped, sleeves hanging loose off his shoulders. His hands rested on his knees, motionless. The sandwich had become an evidence bag, his life, a case number. The room wasn't full. Just a few scattered attendees, 2 reporters scribbling notes, a board in turn with a clipboard, and a tired-looking public defender beside him who hadn't said more than 5 words during intake. "You don't talk much," she'd said. "Only when it counts," he'd replied. She raised an eyebrow. "Let's hope that starts now." The judge, a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a knot, scanned the file in front of her. Her gavel hadn't moved. The case was routine: trespassing, theft of property under $10. A simple plea deal, a short sentence or release with time served. But something in the paperwork had caught her eye. "Staff Sergeant," she read aloud, squinting. The prosecutor cleared his throat. "Yes, Your Honor." Defendant identified himself as a former Army Staff Sergeant, but we haven't verified. "I have his DD 214, the public defender interrupted, surprising herself. She dug into his intake paperwork late last night. Something had nagged at her, the way he stood, the way he didn't try to excuse anything. There had been a quietness to him that didn't feel like defeat. It felt like discipline. She handed the document to the clerk. The judge reviewed it slowly. "You served in Operation 19E-71-G. Henry didn't speak, but his eyes lifted. The courtroom fell still. In the gallery, the intern blinked. She had heard her grandfather speak of that mission once, at Thanksgiving, years ago. He'd called the men who led it a ghost in combat boots. Shadow, he'd said. Nobody knew his name, but he pulled my unit out of hell. She stared at the men sitting silently across the room. Gray-bearded. Hollow-eyed. But something noble in his posture, something heavy in the way he breathed. The judge looked up. Staff Sergeant, were you the mission lead on that operation? Henry paused. Yes, ma'am. She nodded once, then looked back down at the page. And your medical benefits were revoked because the mission was unacknowledged. Classified, Henry said. The word hung like smoke in the air. Suddenly the atmosphere changed. The room, so cold and impersonal minutes ago, began to soften. People shifted in their seats. The prosecutor looked awkwardly at his notes. I would like to request a recess, the public defender said quietly. To consult with Veteran Advocacy Council. This case has context. As the judge called the recess, a man in uniform entered the back of the courtroom. Army dress blues. A chest full of medals. He wasn't part of the court. He had come on a phone call from someone who recognized a name in a docket. He stepped forward as the courtroom cleared, removing his cap. Staff Sergeant Voss, he asked. Henry stood, stiff but upright. Yes. I'm Captain Thorne. My father served under you in Syria. He told me about Shadow. Henry's jaw tensed. I'd like to speak with you privately, Thorne added. And make a few phone calls. Outside the courtroom, in the hallway full of echoes and vending machines, Henry leaned against the wall and stared at the floor. He didn't understand what was happening, not fully, but he knew the weight in his chest had shifted. The silence around him wasn't hostile anymore. It was listening. Inside, the judge remained seated long after the room emptied. She looked down at the photo clipped to the DD-214, young Voss, crew-cut, unreadable expression. You are not invisible here, she whispered. Then, more firmly, not anymore, Staff Sergeant. The second court date wasn't just a proceeding. It was a reckoning. The courtroom looked the same chairs, the same wood-paneled walls, but the air felt different. Charged. Alive. Reporters had filled the gallery this time. Not for a sandwich theft, but for a story that had begun spreading online, the men they called Shadow. Veterans groups had mobilized. A retired colonel flew in from Texas. The American Legion sent a rep. Henry didn't understand most of it. He sat quietly, hands folded in his lap, still wearing the same worn coat, though someone had offered to buy him a new one. He declined. He didn't want anything for show. Captain Thorne stood near the back of the room, watching. His call to a military journalist had sparked an inquiry. Within 72 hours, several operations previously sealed under classified acts were reopened for limited verification. Henry's name was in all of them, footnotes in black ink that proved he'd been more than a ghost. The VA responded with a formal apology and an expedited case review. His benefits were reinstated. Retroactively. 8 years of back pay, medical support, and housing aid were authorized within a day. But the money wasn't what shook him. It was the acknowledgement. The judge returned to the bench and cleared her throat. I have reviewed the supplemental records provided by military personnel. The defendant's status is no longer in dispute. Her voice softened. Staff Sergeant Voss, I hereby dismiss all charges against you. She looked up. You were let down by a system that should have honored you. And instead, it forgot you. That ends today. Henry didn't speak. He couldn't. His throat closed tight, not from fear, but from something unfamiliar. Relief. The public defender placed a gentle hand on his forearm. You're not a case file anymore. In the audience, a young Marine in full uniform stood. No order. No command. Just instinct. He raised his hand to his brow and saluted. One by one, others followed. A Vietnam veteran in a leather vest. A woman in a wheelchair with an Air Force patch on her lap blanket. Even Captain Thorne. The room fell silent as Henry slowly stood. Not tall like he once was, but straight. He nodded, but didn't return the salute. he didn't need to. Outside, a light snow began to fall, soft flakes spinning like memory. Henry stepped into the cold, blinking beneath a slate sky. He wasn't sure what to feel. Gratitude, maybe. Bitterness, maybe not. It wasn't justice that moved him most. It was dignity. For the first time in years, people saw him. Not as a vagrant. Not as a problem. As a man. In the days that followed, calls came from senators' offices, foundations, even a documentary filmmaker. Henry turned down interviews, turned off the phone the public defender had bought him. He wasn't interested in fame. Fame was just another uniform. Instead, he accepted a one-bedroom unit in a veterans' housing facility. It had a small window, a working heater, and a shelf where he placed the folded photo of his unit, edges worn but intact. Mike's face looked out at him from the center. A counselor came to visit. A quiet woman named Elaine who spoke in slow rhythms and asked about his dreams. "I don't have them anymore," Henry said. "That doesn't mean they're gone," she replied. He thought about that. He didn't say no. One evening, he walked to the local park, coat zipped, shoulders pulled back. Children played in the distance. A man jogged past with a dog on a leash. Henry sat on a bench and listened to the sound of wind in the trees. It didn't sound like silence anymore. It sounded like breath. Like life. The apartment smelled like fresh paint and clean sheets. It was modest, bare walls, a small kitchenette, one armchair, and a twin bed. But the heater worked. The floor didn't creak. The faucet ran hot within seconds. To Henry, it might as well have been a palace. On the shelf near the window sat a folded American flag in a wooden case, a gift from a veterans organization. Next to it, a worn photo of his old unit, flattened under glass. Mike's face, still grinning in the middle. Someone had helped him frame it. Beside the photo stood something new, a ceramic bowl. Inside it were dog biscuits. The sound of gentle paws echoed down the hallway. Then came a thump, followed by a scrabbling slide. "Easy there," Henry called. A golden retriever burst into the room, tongue out, tail whipping back and forth like a metronome of joy. The shelter named him Buddy, but Henry simply called him Boy. The dog had chosen him, not the other way around, sat at Henry's feet during a shelter visit and refused to budge. It reminded him of a time long past, when loyalty came before questions. When someone had your back because that's what brothers did. Most mornings now began the same. Coffee. A walk to the park. Henry wore a weathered army green jacket someone had donated, stitched over the heart with one simple word, Voss. In the park, he'd sit on a bench near the playground and watch the world move. Parents pushing strollers. Kids kicking soccer balls. Laughter that wasn't forced. Dogs barking in the distance. Life, unfiltered. One morning, a woman in her 30s approached him, brown curls, kind eyes, hesitant smile. "You're Staff Sergeant Voss." "I was," he said gently. She held out a Tupperware dish. "My dad served with you. He saw the article about the case. Said if I ever ran into you, I should say thank you." Henry took the dish, eyes soft. "Tell him I remember." "Tell him I said it back." Later that week, he received an invitation. A small ceremony at the local community center. Just a few veterans, a few city officials, nothing grand. He almost didn't go. But the photo on the shelf seemed to look at him differently that night. Like it was waiting. So he shaved. Put on a collared shirt. Even tied a tie, albeit loosely. Boy walked beside him all the way, leash relaxed, tail proud. The ceremony was brief. No speeches, just acknowledgments. A councilwoman read his name aloud and called him to the front. As he stood there, unsure of what to do with his hands, an older man in a wheelchair raised his arm in salute. Others followed. No clapping. No music. Just reverence. They handed him a plaque, simple wood, engraved with words he read only once before quietly slipping it into his jacket pocket. For service seen and unseen. For battles fought in silence. For coming home. That night, Henry sat at the window with Boy curled at his feet. Snow was falling again, soft and slow, The kind of snow that didn't bite. The kind that dusted the streets like a clean page. He thought about Mike. About the jungle. About bridges and benches and sandwiches gone stale. Then he thought about soup. About hands that offered help without asking for stories. About a courtroom that went quiet. He looked down at the dog tags on his wrist, no longer a reminder of what was lost. Now, a symbol of what had endured. He whispered into the silence, "I found my way back. Just like you promised." And the snow kept falling, but it didn't feel cold anymore. It felt like peace.